You are not becoming distant, you are becoming unreadable to the old order. Something in you has already happened. And it did not ask for permission, it did not negotiate, it did not send a polite notice to the people who built their sense of safety on your predictability. One day, you simply did not arrive in the same form. You did not explain, you did not soften the edge. You did not perform the usual emotional duties that kept the room warm. And what is most unsettling to them is not your silence itself, but the quality of it. It is not sulking, it is not punishment, it is not a tactic, it is a stillness with weight in it. A stillness that feels like a locked door that has been locked from the inside. They sense it immediately. Even when they pretend they do not, the atmosphere changes around you as though a familiar current has been cut. The small rituals that used to work no longer work. The little probes no longer find a soft place to enter. The familiar hooks, guilt, obligation, sentimentality, urgency no longer catch. And this is why the reactions around you become strange, a sudden kindness that feels too polished, a sudden coldness that arrives too quickly, a sudden confusion acted out as accusation, a sudden generosity that feels like a bribe, a sudden moral speech delivered as if it were a rope thrown over a cliff. They try many doors. They speak in different tones. They use different faces. They summon different histories. They remind you of who you were supposed to be. But all their doors meet the same fact: access has ended. Notice how the panic does not always appear as panic. Panic often wears a costume. It can wear the costume of concern. Are you okay? You seem different. It can wear the costume of offense. What did I do to deserve this? It can wear the costume of philosophy. I just think people should communicate. It can wear the costume of humor, jokes that press the bruise to see if it still hurts. Or it can wear the costume of distance, because if they step away first, they can tell themselves they chose it. Yet under every costume there is a single instinct moving. The system that once relied on your readability is searching for the old handle. The old handle was simple. It was your reflex to be understandable, your reflex to be good, your reflex to smooth the air, your reflex to repair tension before it could become conflict, your reflex to answer the unspoken demand, to decode another person's mood before they had to name it, to offer emotional labor like a household utility that was always running. That reflex made you safe to many people, not because you were protected, but because you were available. You were the kind of person whose inner world could be reached without knocking. And now, without a dramatic announcement, you have withdrawn that utility, not with a speech, not with an argument, with an absence of reaction, with a refusal to be pulled into the familiar choreography, with a silence that does not invite negotiation. This is the moment old power collapses. Most power in relationships is not violent, it is not even conscious. It is the power of access. Who can enter your inner chamber whenever they wish? Who can press a certain button and reliably summon a feeling: guilt, fear, hope, apology, justification, reassurance? Who can make you explain yourself until your energy dissolves and you become compliant simply because you are tired? Who can make you feel morally wrong for having boundaries? Who can make you doubt your own perception by insisting they are the injured party? These are not always villains. Some are simply unconscious. Some truly believe that closeness means unlimited entry. But the mechanism remains the old order dependent on your permeability. You have become impermeable without becoming cruel. That is what terrifies them. Because cruelty, at least, can be predicted. Cruelty still plays the old game. Cruelty still reacts. Cruelty still offers leverage. But your dangerous calm offers no leverage. It is like watching a door that used to swing open now stand closed without trembling. You see, there is a particular sign that frightens manipulators, whether they are subtle or obvious, whether they are charming or wounded, whether they call their manipulation love or need or family. The sign is not anger. Anger they can use. Anger keeps the thread alive. The sign is not sadness. Sadness invites rescue, which keeps access open. The sign is not clarity. Clarity can be argued with, negotiated with, reframed. The sign is the disappearance of your inner explanation. When you stop offering your inner story, their power loses its map. They used to navigate you by reading your micro movements, the slight tremor in your voice, the apologetic smile, the quick attempt to fix, the anxious laughter, the long message sent at midnight to restore peace. Those were your signals. You were a lantern in the dark that made you easy to find. Now the lantern is out, and you are still there, but you are no longer advertising yourself. So they begin to circle. They test you with small requests that are not really requests. They test you with nostalgia, as if memory were a key. They test you with moral language, as if righteousness could open a lock. They test you with criticism, because they hope shame will make you step forward and explain. They test you with tenderness, because tenderness used to dissolve you. They test you with silence, because they want you to feel the old responsibility to break it. They test you with emergencies, because urgency is a crowbar, and each time they discover something that feels unnatural to them, the crowbar does not move the door. This is why you may notice a new hostility forming in people who once relied on you. It is not always personal, it is structural. They are responding to the collapse of a role you used to play: translator, absorber, healer, buffer, peacemaker, emotional bank. When that role disappears, the room must face what it had been avoiding, and rather than face it, many will turn toward you with a strange accusation. You have changed. Yes, but the deeper truth is harsher. The contract has ended. I use the word contract carefully. Often there is an unconscious contract in relationships, written long before words, written in the language of childhood. You learned early, perhaps very early, that love could be earned by being easy to read, easy to correct, easy to guilt, easy to summon. You learned that tension in others was dangerous, and that your safest position was to become an interpreter of moods, a manager of emotional weather. You became skilled. The world rewarded you for it. People called you kind, mature, empathetic, but a skill can become a prison when the ego builds its identity around it. Now something in you has refused that prison. It does not feel like a decision. That is important. If it were a decision, You could be argued back into it. If it were a plan, you could be tempted out of it. But what has occurred in you is more like a shift in gravity. The same old provocations land and do not ignite. The same old guilt speeches strike the surface and do not penetrate. The same old emotional storms pass, and you do not run outside to be struck by lightning in someone else's sky. And because you do not perform the old reflex, you become frightening, not because you are loud, but because you are quiet in a new way. Here, the symbol of the locked door becomes essential. A door is not merely a barrier. A door is a boundary with meaning. It says there is an inside and an outside. And entry requires recognition. A manipulator hates a door because a door forces them to admit you exist as a separate interior. They prefer curtains, soft boundaries, symbolic boundaries, boundaries that can be pushed aside with emotion. But a door, especially a locked one, announces a hard fact. Your inner world is not communal property. There is another symbol that often appears at this stage, the mirror. The old order loved your transparency. They loved that you were like a clear window. They could see their own needs reflected in you and call it closeness. They could pour their confusion into you and call it connection. But when you become opaque, the mirror returns their gaze to them, and that is unbearable for many. Without your constant emotional response, they must encounter themselves, perhaps their dependency, perhaps their entitlement, perhaps their emptiness, perhaps their anger, perhaps their fear of abandonment. They cannot use you as a screen anymore, so they either flee or they attack, or they attempt to shatter the mirror by blaming you for what they are forced to see. You may have had a dream like this, or something close to it, without knowing why it lingered. Imagine you are in a house you recognize but cannot name. The rooms are familiar yet wrong, as though the architecture of your life has shifted slightly out of alignment. You walk down a hallway and find a door at the end. A door that you somehow know is yours. You reach for the handle and it is cold. The lock is already turned. You search your pockets for a key and find none. Behind you, you hear footsteps, many footsteps approaching, but you do not see anyone. You feel the pressure of expectation in the air, as though an invisible crowd is waiting for you to open the door for them. You turn toward the sound and see, on the wall, a mirror. In the mirror, you do not look frightened. You look calm, too calm, almost unfamiliar. The footsteps stop. The house holds its breath. And then you wake with the sensation of a boundary having been established somewhere deep. A boundary that did not ask your conscious mind for approval. This dream is not about a literal house. It is the psyche speaking in images. The house is your inner life, the arrangement of your complexes, the old pathways of habit and identity. The locked door is the boundary forming around the self, around something in you that can no longer be accessed through guilt or need. The footsteps are the press of the collective family, friends, partners, systems, any structure that assumed entry. And the mirror, this is decisive, shows you the new face of your ego. No longer pleading to be understood, the mirror shows that the change is not coming from outside, it is coming from within, and that is why the fear around you grows. People can tolerate many things, but they struggle to tolerate the autonomy of another psyche, especially if they have built their own stability on your compliance. You may notice that some people become suddenly more moral around you. They speak about communication, kindness, respect, family, loyalty, spirituality, being the bigger person. Such words can be true, but they can also be used as ropes. The unconscious is clever. It dresses its hunger in holiness. It dresses its demand for access in virtue. It says, if you loved me, you would explain. It says, if you were healed, you would be available. It says, if you were mature, you would not have boundaries that make me uncomfortable. These statements reveal something without meaning to. They equate love with permeability. But love is not permeability. Permeability is a childhood survival strategy. Love is recognition of the other as other. The terror you evoke is not because you are cold. It is because you have stopped being an instrument. The moment you stop being an instrument, you become a mystery, and to the manipulative psyche again, whether consciously manipulative or simply unconsciously dependent, mystery is a threat. Mystery means they cannot predict the outcome. Mystery means their usual levers may no longer produce the usual effects. Mystery means their persona, the face they use to obtain what they want, may no longer charm you, frighten you, soften you, or shame you. Here we must speak of persona, not as a fashionable term, but as a psychic organ. The persona is the mask by which a person adapts to society and to relationships. It is not evil, it is necessary, but when a person's inner life is weak, their persona becomes their only power. They do not know how to meet another human being soul to soul, because they have never met themselves that way. So they meet you through the mask, through charm, through competence, through victimhood, through moral superiority, through seduction, through helpfulness, and when you no longer respond to the mask, they feel annihilated. They feel as if you are withholding love, but what you are actually withholding is participation in their performance. This is why the old power collapses around you with such noise. It is not only interpersonal, it is archetypal. A whole style of relating dies when one person stops feeding it. The system loses its fuel. And inside you, something else becomes visible. The shadow. Your shadow is not merely your bad side. It is everything in you that was rejected in order to maintain the persona you believed you had to be. If you had to be kind, then your anger was exiled. If you had to be understanding, then your refusal was exiled. If you had to be good, then your instinct to protect yourself was exiled. If you had to be agreeable, then your capacity to disappoint was exiled. The shadow does not disappear. It waits, it gathers energy, and when the moment is ripe, it returns not as chaos necessarily, but as structure. People misunderstand this. They believe integration of anger means you become explosive. Often it is the opposite. When anger is unconscious, it leaks, it lashes, it poisons, it over-explains, it pleases resentfully, it forgives too quickly and punishes later. But when anger has been integrated, it becomes a backbone, it becomes the spine of no. It becomes the architectural beam that holds the inner house. You do not need to shout no when the entire structure of you has become a boundary. And that is why your calm feels dangerous. It is built, you may feel this in your body, not as anxiety, but as a strange, quiet strength. The chest that used to tighten at confrontation now stays open. The jaw that used to clench to keep peace now loosens. The stomach that used to twist at someone's disappointment now remains steady, as if it has stopped interpreting their emotions as emergencies. This is not numbness. Numbness is dead. This is alive. It is simply no longer available for exploitation. So the world around you responds as the world always responds. When an unconscious contract ends, it tries to resurrect the old contract by making you feel guilty for ending it. It tries to punish you with coldness, to teach you that autonomy has a cost. It tries to recruit others into misunderstanding you, because a group can pressure you where one person cannot. It tries to bait you into defending yourself, because defense is an open door. It tries to provoke you into anger, because anger is contact. It tries to pull you into conversation, because conversation can be turned into negotiation, and negotiation can be turned into surrender. But the sign remains you do not open. And what terrifies manipulators most is not that you are strong. They can handle strength as long as strength still needs recognition. What terrifies them is that you have stopped needing to be believed. You have stopped needing to be understood. You have stopped needing to be liked in order to remain intact. This is the death of their leverage. Their power was never truly over your body. It was over your inner necessity, the necessity to explain, to repair, to be readable, to be good. Now that necessity has vanished, you are not giving the silent treatment. That phrase belongs to childish power games. What has happened in you is of another order. You have become inwardly sovereign, and sovereignty is always frightening to those who depend on access rather than intimacy. So when you see them trying door after door, method after method, tone after tone, do not mistake the variety for complexity. It is one hunger wearing many faces. It is the hunger for the old map. It is the hunger for the old handle. It is the hunger for the old you, because the old you was an open field. But you are no longer an open field. You are a locked door, a mirror, and a calm that cannot be purchased. What unsettles people now is not merely that you are silent, but that your silence no longer contains them. It used to. Your quiet once functioned as an invitation, an empty room into which others could place their feelings, their fears, their unspoken demands. Now your quiet has walls. It echoes back nothing. And when nothing comes back, the psyche of the other person begins to unravel, because it can no longer locate itself through you. This is where the collapse becomes visible in subtler ways. You may notice people speaking more loudly around you, repeating themselves, adding explanations you did not ask for. Volume increases when orientation is lost, or you may notice a sudden intellectualization, as though theory could substitute for intimacy. They talk about patterns, communication styles, attachment, energy, anything that might restore a sense of mastery, or they suddenly withdraw, not because they no longer care, But because your presence without availability forces them into an inner confrontation they are not prepared to endure, you are witnessing the failure of projection. For a long time, others projected onto you what they could not hold within themselves: their goodness, their need, their woundedness, their moral superiority, their helplessness. You were a suitable screen because you were responsive. Projection requires a surface that reflects without resistance. When the surface hardens, projection shatters. And when projection shatters, the projected content does not disappear. It falls back into the psyche of the one who cast it. This return is experienced as anxiety, irritation, depression, or moral outrage. They feel something is wrong, but they cannot name it, because what is wrong is that you no longer carry what was never yours. Here, the labyrinth appears as a necessary symbol. The labyrinth is not a maze designed to confuse others. It is a structure that confuses those who refuse inward movement. To enter a labyrinth is to accept that the path will turn, narrow, reverse, and demand patience. Those who are accustomed to straight corridors, quick access, immediate emotional payoff, predictable responses experience the labyrinth as cruelty. They accuse it of being manipulative, cold, unfair, but the labyrinth does not exist to trap. It exists to filter. Only those willing to walk inward without guarantees can reach the center. You have become a labyrinth. People approach you expecting a familiar entrance and instead encounter complexity, depth, silence, delay. Their usual shortcuts fail, and because they cannot reach the center quickly, they assume the center has been removed. They assume you are withholding something. They assume intention where there is structure. But what has happened in you is structural. The psyche has reorganized itself around a new axis. This axis is not the ego's desire to be strong. It is the self asserting its boundary. In Jungian language, the self is not the personality you present to the world. It is the regulating center of the entire psyche, the totality that includes conscious and unconscious, light and shadow. When the ego has served its function long enough, when it has adapted, suffered, compensated, overcompensated, the self intervenes. Not gently, not politely. It intervenes by withdrawing energy from old patterns. The ego suddenly finds that certain reactions no longer carry charge. Old fears no longer mobilize the body. Old obligations no longer produce urgency. This is not because you have decided to change. It is because the psyche has decided that a certain phase is complete. Completion is always experienced as loss by those who depended on the unfinished state. The unconscious contract that once bound you to others was never written in words. It was written in repetition. Each time you explained yourself to restore peace, the contract was renewed. Each time you absorbed someone else's emotion to keep the relationship stable, the contract was reinforced. Each time you chose understanding over truth, harmony over clarity, you signed again. And because it was unconscious, you believed it was love. But unconscious contracts do not dissolve through conversation. They dissolve when the energy that sustains them is withdrawn. This is why your change does not feel like empowerment. in the heroic sense. It feels quiet, almost dull. There is no triumph, there is no revenge. There is simply an absence of inner movement toward the old role. You watch yourself not responding, and part of you is surprised by it. Another part feels relief. Another part feels nothing at all. This multiplicity is important. It tells you that the change is not located in a single emotion. It is systemic. Now consider a second dream image, one that often appears at this stage. You are standing at the edge of a dark sea at night. The water is calm, almost unnaturally so. There is no moon, but the surface of the sea reflects a faint, diffuse light, as though the darkness itself were luminous. Behind you, on the shore, people are calling your name. Some are angry, some are pleading, some sound confused. You step toward the water, expecting fear, but the water does not resist you. It opens, you wade in, and instead of drowning, you feel a profound steadiness, as if the sea were holding you from below. You turn back once, but the shore is already far away. The voices blur into a single indistinct sound. You do not wave, you do not explain, you simply remain in the water. Awake, this dream is not about escape, it is about depth. The sea is the unconscious, vast, dark, containing forces older than the ego. To enter it consciously is not regression, it is initiation. The night indicates that this movement does not occur under the spotlight of social validation. No one applauds you for it. No one understands it. The calmness of the water reveals that what you feared was not the unconscious itself, but your distance from it. Once you enter, you discover support where you expected annihilation. Those on the shore represent the structures that cannot follow, not because they are evil, but because they are organized around surface-level exchange. They need daylight, they need visibility, they need explanation. The unconscious does not operate there, and when you choose depth, you inevitably lose resonance with those who require shallowness to function. This is where the symbol of the serpent becomes unavoidable. The serpent has always represented transformation that cannot be reversed. It sheds its skin, but it does not return to the old one. To those who live comfortably in the old skin, the serpent is frightening. It moves differently. It does not blink. It does not explain itself. It carries poison. Yes, but poison is also medicine. The serpent's danger is not aggression. It is irreversibility. Your irreversibility is what frightens them. If you were merely angry, they could wait it out. If you were merely hurt, they could apologize strategically. If you were merely confused, they could guide you back. But something in you has crossed a threshold, and thresholds are not opinions. They are points of no return. Here the role collapse becomes evident. The roles you once inhabited, caretaker, mediator, interpreter, emotional anchor, begin to fall away because they require a permeability you no longer possess. People who depended on those roles experience this as betrayal. But roles are not identities, they are functions, and when the psyche no longer supplies energy to a function, it dies. This death creates a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. But not every vacuum is meant to be filled. Some are meant to remain empty so that a new structure can emerge. Others attempt to rush in and fill the space with new demands, new labels, new conflicts. You may find yourself suddenly cast as cold, selfish, arrogant, detached, changed for the worse. These labels are defensive. They protect others from asking the more frightening question, who am I without access to you? Notice how often people interpret your boundary as an attack. This reveals something crucial. They did not experience your availability as a gift. They experienced it as a right. When a right is removed, outrage follows. When a gift is withdrawn, grief follows. Outrage indicates entitlement, grief indicates love. This distinction is not moral, it is diagnostic. Now we must speak of anger, because it is the most misunderstood aspect of this transformation. Integrated anger does not shout, it does not threaten, it does not seek revenge. Integrated anger becomes gravity. It determines what comes close and what does not. It does not argue with what is inappropriate. It simply does not move toward it. This is why your boundaries no longer feel like decisions. A decision requires effort. It requires maintenance. It requires justification. A structure requires none of these. A wall does not debate with the wind. It stands, and because it stands, the wind goes elsewhere. People sense this and respond accordingly. Some grow quiet around you, as though unsure how to behave. Some become performative, exaggerating warmth or dominance in an attempt to provoke a response. Some disappear entirely. These reactions are not random, they are calibrations. Each person is testing whether the old rules still apply, and with each test that fails, the reality of the shift becomes more undeniable. The terrifying insight, dangerous precisely because it cannot be used as a technique, is this: power over you existed only as long as you required relational confirmation to feel real. The moment your sense of reality became inwardly anchored, that power dissolved. This is not independence in the cultural sense. Cultural independence is loud. It announces itself. It posts itself. It declares itself healed. What has happened in you is quieter and far more threatening. You no longer orient yourself through the reactions of others. Their approval no longer stabilizes you. Their disapproval no longer destabilizes you. You have not become invulnerable. You have become uninterested in the old currency, and because the old currency no longer buys access, those who traded in it feel impoverished. Here the symbol of fire completes the sequence. Fire does not negotiate with what it burns. It transforms substance into ash and heat and light. But unlike chaos, fire follows laws. It consumes what is combustible and leaves what is not. In you, fire has burned through false obligation, compulsive goodness, performative empathy, inherited guilt. What remains is denser, quieter, less dramatic. This is why there is no triumph. Fire does not celebrate. It completes its work and moves on. Your dangerous calm is the aftermath of this fire. And in the aftermath, the old identity cannot be repaired. Repair belongs to systems that still function. This one does not. The persona that made you readable, manageable, useful has collapsed. Attempts to revive it feel absurd, even humiliating. You sense that to step back into it would require a betrayal of something essential, something that has finally aligned. This alignment is what others feel as threat. They feel it when you do not rush to explain. They feel it when you allow misunderstanding to exist. They feel it when you do not chase closure. They feel it when you let relationships end without dramatizing them. They feel it when you do not offer yourself as an emotional resource on demand. They feel it when you remain present but unavailable. They feel it as loss of control, and control, when stripped of moral language, is simply the ability to predict and influence another's inner state. You are no longer predictable in that way. This is not because you have become chaotic. It is because you have become whole enough to contain contradiction without resolution. You can be warm without being open. You can be kind without being accessible. You can be silent without being hostile. You can be distant without abandoning yourself. These combinations confuse those who rely on simple equations: warmth equals access, kindness equals compliance, silence equals punishment. The equations no longer balance, and so the old power structures, interpersonal, familial, emotional, begin to crumble, not dramatically at first, quietly, through missed cues, through unanswered hooks, through failed manipulations that reveal themselves by failing, through the dawning realization that you cannot be pulled back into the old orbit. You have not walked away in anger. You have not closed the door in a gesture. The door closed because the house reorganized itself around a new center. And once the center changes, the architecture must follow. This is the moment people feel when they say, "I don't recognize you anymore." They are correct. What they cannot yet recognize is that you finally do. What completes the terror for those who once depended on you is the realization that nothing dramatic is required to restore the old order, and nothing dramatic works. There is no argument to win, no misunderstanding to clarify, no apology to extract, no confession to provoke. They wait for a crack, a moment of fatigue, a return of the old reflex. But what has changed in you is not a mood. It is orientation. Orientation is everything. A psyche oriented outward lives by feedback. It scans faces, tones, silence, atmospheres, searching for cues about how to exist. It adapts quickly, skillfully, often brilliantly, but it never rests. A psyche oriented inward rests even while it moves. Its reference point is no longer the reaction of the other, but an inner alignment that does not require witnesses. When this orientation shifts, behavior changes without intention. You do not set boundaries. Boundaries appear because movement towards certain dynamics simply does not occur anymore. This is why people feel abandoned even when you are still physically present. They confuse presence with access. You can sit in the same room, speak politely, listen attentively, and yet remain unreachable. Not hidden, not defended, simply not open, and because there is no visible barricade, they search for one. They accuse you of withholding, of being passive-aggressive, of playing games. They cannot accept that what they are encountering is not strategy but structure. Structure is terrifying because it does not bend. Here, the psyche reveals something uncomfortable. Many relationships were never built on mutual recognition, but on asymmetrical permeability. One person adapted, the other oriented. One person explained, the other interpreted. One person absorbed, the other discharged. When the absorbing function stops, the discharging psyche panics. It experiences its own unprocessed material flooding back, and rather than recognize this as an inner event, it externalizes the threat. You are the problem. Projection always seeks a host, but you are no longer hospitable. This is where the symbol of the mirror deepens. Earlier, the mirror returned their gaze. Now it does something more disturbing. It refuses to distort. You do not react in a way that confirms their self-image. The manipulative psyche, again, whether subtle or obvious, requires distortion. It needs you to see them as they wish to be seen: the victim, the hero, the misunderstood one, the generous one, the reasonable one. When your reactions cease to supply that confirmation, they feel exposed, not seen exposed, and exposure without support feels like annihilation. This is why they may suddenly accuse you of lacking empathy. Empathy, to them, meant participation in their inner drama. It meant co-regulation without reciprocity. It meant you carrying what they could not. But empathy is not absorption. Empathy without boundaries is self-erasure. What you have lost is not empathy. What you have lost is self-erasure. The Jungian term for what collapses here is the complex. A complex is not merely a strong emotion. It is a semi-autonomous structure within the psyche, formed around repeated emotional patterns, often rooted in early relationships: the good child complex, the responsible one, the peacemaker, the emotional anchor. These are not moral identities. They are survival formations. They organize behavior automatically. They respond before consciousness intervenes. And because they once protected you, they were reinforced by the environment. But complexes do not dissolve because you understand them. They dissolve when they are deprived of energy. Energy is withdrawn when the psyche no longer needs the complex to survive. This is the completed event in you. Survival has given way to individuation. Individuation is often misunderstood as self-development. It is not. It is the process by which the psyche becomes what it already is, rather than what it needed to be. It is not additive, it is subtractive. It removes false necessity. It dismantles borrowed identities. It ends unconscious loyalty to roles that once ensured belonging but now ensure stagnation. When individuation reaches this stage, the ego experiences a strange paradox. On one hand, there is less inner noise, fewer debates, less rumination. On the other hand, there is greater external conflict, not because you are creating it, but because you are no longer managing it for others. What was once absorbed internally now appears externally. Tension that once lived in your body now appears between bodies, and people blame you for it. They say you are creating distance, when in fact, distance was always there. You were simply bridging it with effort. They say you are cold, when in fact, you are no longer overheating to keep others warm. They say you are withholding, when in fact you have stopped giving what was never sustainable. These accusations are confessions disguised as judgments. They reveal dependency without naming it. This is where the symbol of the lock gate emerges, distinct from the door. A door implies potential entry. A gate implies territory. Territory implies sovereignty. The psyche that has individuated does not merely close doors. It claims land. It establishes an inner geography that others must respect or leave. This is not arrogance. It is differentiation. Differentiation terrifies those who rely on fusion. Fusion feels like love to the unfocused psyche. It feels like closeness, unity, intimacy, but fusion is only possible when at least one person sacrifices differentiation. You did that for a long time. You fused by explaining, by adapting, by softening, by yielding. Now fusion is no longer possible because you have reassembled your psychic borders. This is why manipulation fails. Manipulation relies on predictability. It relies on emotional reflexes that can be triggered. It relies on guilt that can be activated. It relies on fear of abandonment that can be exploited. It relies on your need to be seen as good. When these levers no longer move anything inside you, manipulation becomes absurd. It reveals itself by its futility, and futility enrages the manipulative psyche. You may notice attempts to escalate. When subtle tactics fail, volume increases. When volume fails, moral pressure appears. When moral pressure fails, withdrawal or punishment is attempted. When punishment fails, despair may surface, or contempt, or sudden indifference. These are not random emotional swings. They are stages of a system losing control. Control is not always malicious. Often it is simply unconscious fear seeking stability. But fear does not become harmless because it is unconscious. It still seeks relief. And when relief cannot be obtained through you, you become the perceived obstacle. Here the image of the serpent returns, now entwined with fire. The serpent sheds skin because growth makes the old form unbearable. Fire burns the old form because it is no longer viable. Together they represent transformation that cannot be undone. The psyche that has passed through this does not go back to accessibility. Even if it wants to try would feel like suffocation. To reopen indiscriminately would feel like betrayal of the self. This is why even loneliness feels different now. Loneliness used to feel like abandonment, like failure, like danger. Now, when it appears, it carries a different quality. It is quieter, less desperate, more spacious. It does not scream for remedy. It simply exists as a byproduct of differentiation. You are alone in a new way, not because no one is around, but because you no longer dissolve yourself to belong. And this is deeply threatening to relational systems built on mutual dependence rather than mutual recognition. People often believe manipulators are always confident, always dominant. This is a misunderstanding. Many manipulators are anxious. Many are terrified of inner emptiness. Many depend on others to regulate their sense of self. When you withdraw emotional access, you remove their regulator. Their anxiety spikes. They may call it hurt, but its intensity reveals something else: panic at losing an external stabilizer. Your calm, therefore, feels cruel to them, not because it is cruel, but because it does not rescue. Rescue is addictive. It creates roles, it creates hierarchies, it creates meaning. When rescue disappears, those who were rescued must face their own agency or their own emptiness. Both are frightening if one has never practiced inner responsibility. This is why some people will attempt to provoke your anger. Anger would reopen the circuit. Anger would create engagement. Anger would allow them to feel powerful again, either as victim or adversary. But your anger, having been integrated, does not leap outward. It stays where it belongs as boundary. Integrated anger does not seek expression. It seeks order. Order is quiet. Order is firm. Order does not explain itself to chaos. You may sense this order in the way your body responds now. Situations that once drained you now simply end. Conversations that once spiraled now fall flat. Emotional storms that once pulled you in now pass by without suction. This is not detachment born of numbness. It is detachment born of clarity. You see the pattern and no longer feel compelled to complete it. Compulsion has ended. And because compulsion has ended, repetition has ended. You are no longer reenacting the same relational script with different actors. This alone is enough to destabilize entire networks. Systems depend on repetition. When one node stops repeating, the system must reorganize or collapse. Many choose collapse. They walk away, they cut you off, they dismiss you, they label you, they rewrite history. These acts are attempts to restore narrative control. If they can define you as the problem, they do not have to face the more disturbing truth: the relationship was sustained by imbalance, and the imbalance is gone. What remains in you is not superiority, but finality. Finality is frightening because it leaves no room for hope of reversal. Hope, in this context, is not noble. It is the hope that you will resume your function, that you will soften, that you will explain, that you will return to readability. When hope dies, reality must be faced. Reality is this: you are no longer available for unconscious contracts. This does not make you isolated, it makes you precise. Precision is misunderstood as coldness by those who relied on diffusion. But diffusion is not intimacy. Diffusion is boundarylessness. Precision allows real meeting, but only with those capable of meeting you as a separate psyche. Many cannot, and so they fall away, not because you rejected them, but because they cannot survive without access. This is the dangerous insight taking shape in lived experience. The most threatening thing to manipulative dynamics is not resistance, but completion. When something in you has finished, there is nothing left to argue with. You are not holding the line, you are the line, and because you are the line, the old world stops at your edge. In the final movement of this transformation, something else becomes apparent. You no longer seek to correct misunderstandings about yourself. This is subtle, but decisive. The need to be seen accurately was once bound to survival. If you were misunderstood, danger followed rejection, conflict, loss. Now, misunderstanding does not endanger your inner coherence. It merely reveals incompatibility. This shift alone terrifies manipulators more than any confrontation ever could, because confrontation still acknowledges their relevance. Indifference, grounded and calm, does not, and so the final illusions dissolve. The illusion that explaining brings peace, the illusion that accessibility equals love, the illusion that being needed equals being valued, the illusion that harmony is always healthy. What replaces these illusions is not cynicism, it is sobriety. Sobriety of the soul. You see clearly what each relationship was built on. You feel no urge to destroy what was false. You simply do not inhabit it anymore. You step out of roles as one steps out of old clothing without ceremony, without apology, without nostalgia strong enough to pull you back inside. This is not a transition you are moving through. It is one you have completed. And what remains is a dangerous calm that does not seek to prove itself. It simply exists, unreachable to manipulation, unavailable to old power, anchored where it cannot be taken. In you, what now unfolds is not resolution, but exposure, with the old contracts dissolved and the old power structures collapsed. What remains is not peace in the sentimental sense. It is clarity without consolation. The psyche, having withdrawn from unconscious submission, no longer seeks harmony at the cost of truth. And this is why the final stage feels so stark. There is nothing left to negotiate. This is where many misunderstand what has occurred in you. They imagine you are withholding affection, when in fact affection has been freed from obligation. They imagine you are detached, when in fact attachment has been replaced by contact only where contact is real. They imagine you are cold, when in fact warmth is no longer a currency. What frightens them is that you are no longer persuadable. Persuasion depends on doubt, and doubt has lost its grip, not because you have become certain about everything, but because uncertainty no longer destabilizes you. You can stand in not knowing without rushing to fill it. This capacity alone dismantles entire relational hierarchies. The one who can endure ambiguity without collapsing cannot be ruled by those who require constant reassurance. Here the symbol of the night sea returns. Now understood more fully, the night sea is not comfort, it is containment. It holds without explaining, it supports without promising. When you entered it, something essential happened. You discovered that you could remain intact without being mirrored by others. You no longer needed their reflection to confirm your existence. The self became its own witness. This is the moment when individuation passes a critical threshold. Before this, individuation is aspirational. After this, it is irreversible. Irreversibility is the true danger. Manipulative dynamics survive on reversibility. They survive on the belief that if pressure is applied correctly through guilt, fear, nostalgia, or moral appeal, the old response can be recovered. But when a transformation is irreversible, pressure becomes meaningless. It reveals itself as noise. Noise does not disturb structure, and this is why your presence now carries a strange authority without intention. You do not assert it, you do not claim it, you do not defend it. It emerges from the fact that you no longer orient around others' expectations. Authority, in this sense, is not dominance, it is self-coherence. Self-coherence is rare. Most people live in a state of inner fragmentation, held together by roles, habits, and external validation. They fear coherence because coherence demands sacrifice, the sacrifice of false selves, inherited loyalties, and comforting illusions. When they encounter someone who has already made that sacrifice without bitterness, without superiority, they feel exposed. Exposure creates two responses: withdrawal or attack. Some will quietly leave your life, unable to articulate why your presence now feels uncomfortable. Others will become hostile, inventing narratives to protect themselves from the truth they sense but cannot bear. They may accuse you of changing too much, of becoming someone else, of betraying shared history, but history does not grant ownership. Shared past does not entitle perpetual access. This is a difficult truth for those who confuse continuity with intimacy. You have not erased the past. You have simply stopped allowing it to dictate the present. And because you no longer use the past as leverage against yourself, others can no longer use it either. Memory has lost its power as a weapon. Here, the symbol of the mirror completes its work. Earlier, the mirror returned projection. Now it does something final. It no longer needs to be looked into. You are no longer preoccupied with how you appear. Self-reflection has done its work and stepped aside. This is not narcissism. Narcissism cannot stop looking. This is liberation from the mirror altogether. When the mirror loses importance, comparison loses power. Comparison is one of the most effective tools of manipulation. It says, be like this, not like that. It says you are better when you are more available, more forgiving, more patient, more understanding. It says your worth depends on how well you fit the relational economy. But when you no longer measure yourself through comparison, the economy collapses. You are no longer tradable. This is why even well-meaning people may feel unsettled around you. They sense that you are not playing the same game. You do not seek reassurance through agreement. You do not offer reassurance to secure belonging. You do not rush to smooth tension. You allow silence to exist. And silence, when it is not anxious, reveals everything that speech once concealed. Silence reveals who is comfortable with themselves. Those who are not will try to fill it. They will speak more, explain more, justify more, demand more. Their discomfort will grow louder. Your silence will remain unchanged. This contrast is unbearable to many. They interpret it as judgment because they cannot imagine neutrality. Neutrality threatens those who rely on emotional reactions to orient themselves. Here, the symbol of the locked gate reaches its final meaning. The gate does not open and close in response to requests. It stands as a fact. It does not hate those who remain outside. It does not punish them. It simply marks the boundary of a territory that cannot be entered without transformation. Those who wish to pass must change their mode of being, and most would rather accuse the gate than transform themselves. This is not tragic. It is inevitable. Every individuation leaves casualties, not because it intends harm, but because it refuses compromise with falsity. The psyche that has individuated cannot pretend for the sake of harmony. Pretending would fracture it again, and fracture is no longer acceptable. This is why there is no desire in you to repair what has fallen apart. Repair implies that the structure was sound. It was not. It functioned, yes, but at your expense. The psyche does not mourn structures that required self-betrayal to sustain. What you feel instead is a strange neutrality toward endings. Endings no longer feel like failures. They feel like conclusions. Something has finished its work, and when work is finished, continuation would be wasteful. The psyche conserves energy now. It does not spend itself on what cannot reciprocate. Reciprocity is the new law, not transactional reciprocity, but existential reciprocity, the capacity of two psyches to meet without one dissolving into the other. Many relationships cannot survive this law because they were built precisely on dissolution. They require one person to bend, absorb, interpret, forgive endlessly. When that function disappears, the relationship reveals its true shape. This revelation is not cruel. Cruelty would be intentional harm. What is happening is exposure to reality. Reality is often experienced as cruelty by those who depended on illusion. Here we must address the final fear that you have become unreachable even to yourself. That in closing doors, you have closed something essential. This fear belongs to the old ego, which equated openness with aliveness, but aliveness does not require exposure. A seed is alive in the dark, a heart is alive behind ribs, a psyche is alive within limits. What you have lost is not feeling, it is compulsion. Compulsion made you responsive even when response harmed you. Compulsion made you explain even when explanation diminished you. Compulsion made you stay available even when availability drained you. With compulsion gone, feeling becomes cleaner. It arises and passes without hijacking your behavior. This is why your emotions no longer dictate your actions. You can feel sadness without chasing comfort. You can feel anger without expressing it destructively. You can feel love without surrendering boundaries. You can feel fear without obeying it. This internal separation between feeling and action is the hallmark of maturity. It is not repression. Repression forces feeling underground. This allows feeling to exist without ruling. Those who cannot tolerate this separation interpret it as coldness, but coldness is absence of feeling. What you embody is containment. Containment is powerful. Contained fire does not burn indiscriminately. Contained water does not flood. Contained anger does not destroy. It orders, it clarifies, it protects. This is why your presence now changes rooms without effort. You do not dominate, you do not persuade, you do not perform, you simply are. And systems organized around emotional extraction feel destabilized by your refusal to participate. Refusal here is not active, it is existential. You are no longer available for unconscious use. This is the most dangerous insight, and the one that cannot be taught as a method power over you was never taken. It was given unconsciously, repeatedly, in the hope of safety and belonging. When the psyche matures, it quietly stops giving. There is no revenge in this, no triumph, no superiority, only an ending, and endings do not explain themselves. The final reframe is this: you have not withdrawn from relationship. You have withdrawn from distortion. What remains is the possibility of meeting where meeting is real. Fewer relationships will qualify. This is not elitism, it is mathematics. Depth reduces quantity. Those who can meet you now will do so without demanding access, without needing to control, without asking you to disappear for their comfort. They will not fear your silence. They will recognize it as presence. They will not panic at your boundaries. They will experience them as safety. Everyone else will fade, not because you pushed them away, but because the old world no longer reaches you. You will not go back to explain this. Explanation belongs to a phase that has ended. You will not repair what collapsed. Collapse was the message. You will not soften the truth to make it palatable. The truth no longer needs permission. What has closed has closed. What has integrated has integrated. The old identity has completed its cycle, and what remains is not a promise, not a goal, not a becoming. It is a finished fact. You are no longer accessible to manipulation because you are no longer divided against yourself. And nothing terrifies manipulative power more than a psyche that has come home and locked the door from the inside.